let's just dive right in. Dan, did you want to kick us off? We had a kind of a cliffhanger at the end of last week from what I saw on the YouTube video about podcast SEO.
Yeah.
You want to dive in and give your hot take on how people can make their podcast SEO friendly?
Fantastic. It is a frequent question I get is podcasts and search engine optimization. Essentially, will transcripts help your SEO substantially or even a little bit? Let's talk about that because it's like a yes but not in the way you would hope, not the way you would expect. So a lot of companies put a lot of time and effort into transcripts. And it's not that transcripts are bad. Transcripts are actually really useful for a number of different reasons. It certainly makes your podcast more accessible to those who are deaf and can't hear it. So the only thing they can do is read it. So they're helpful for that. They create a little bit of a better user experience if you embed it onto a blog page where you have the audio player on top, transcript below. And for that reason, and because Google can now read it a little bit, it does help SEO a little bit. And I'm not talking about the kind of podcast SEO where you're getting ranked in the players, right? In the podcast apps. That's a different kind of SEO. And it doesn't affect that much at all. So that's off the table with transcripts. But it can affect a little bit because now Google can actually essentially read the podcast. And so it can take into consideration that it might be worthwhile. But I know as a search engine optimist or optimizer, someone who actually writes blog posts for search engines all the time personally and have worked with teams to do this over and over again. Anytime I come up against a blog post where it's ranking with the transcript, I know that's easily knocked down. Because people don't like to read transcripts. They're not easy to read compared to a blog post, right? A blog post, they're very scannable. You can usually find the information really quickly. The information is like not hidden in the transcript somewhere where it's kind of like person A spoke, person B spoke, person A spoke. And even if you dress it up a little bit, it can help a lot. But in general, I don't find that it works well for SEO content. There's another big caveat that people usually miss. If you want to use your podcast for SEO, even if you have really robust transcripts, it's probably not going to bring you a lot of traffic because chances are you're using the podcast to come up with great content that will work well for your podcast, to work well for social. But if you want to rank well on Google, you have to do the work ahead of time of coming up what topics are people actually searching for and what's the competition for those keywords. And then how do we actually craft a page that actually provides the answer to that intent, the question that they're asking when they're searching for that thing. So if you go through it with that mentality, you actually have to completely redo your whole podcast. You have to come at it with a list of topics, get your guests who are experts on that topic and can deliver it, and then ask them the right questions to kind of get the content you need essentially to make the blog post that then rank on Google. If you do it that way, then it works well. But then again, if you're going to put that much work into it, I wouldn't use a transcript. I'd be writing a whole blog post. The amount of work to hand transcribe and to write a blog post isn't too far off. It's worth the extra money if you're putting that much front end work into it to just write the blog post. So that's an often SEO misconception is that transcripts heavily improve SEO. And it's kind of like, not really. It's not going to drive traffic because you're not going to be ranking for anything worthwhile if you rank at all.
Yeah.
So that's where it fits in.
Does anybody have any follow-on questions or thoughts to add to that? I know podcast SEO is something we get asked about a lot.
There is, recently I read something about Google. Since they did the speech-to-text for podcasts, I heard that they were soon going to implement it into the SERP system, the search engine results page. So more and more, I think, even though transcripting right now it's not that good. I mean, I'd rather have a summary of a podcast, when you go onto the page instead of the actual transcript. But in future, transcripts might be an option to think about.
Yep. We actually use a host that gives you automatic transcripts called Sounder. You can even just take their transcript, copy and paste it underneath, which is kind of a nice little start. So they have their own transcription tool, which works pretty well. Google is reading podcasts now, so they actually can see it. They are not yet placing it into rankings, except unless you're searching for the word podcast, then they are taking it up. And it's kind of like that It's like a pre-spot on top. Try it sometime, like business podcasts or how to start a business podcast, right? And then you'll start to see podcasting in the SERPs. But those they just don't have very high volume, and they haven't figured out how to work podcasts into actual SERP topics like they have with YouTube videos. YouTube videos are getting worked into all kinds of queries, whether they're searching for videos or not. They're like, how to tie a tie, and it's like, boom, YouTube video. Right at a minute and 32 seconds into this YouTube video, watch it. That's how to tie a tie. Because honestly, it was the best answer.
One thing that we've tried to do, so our service, a podcast production service, we're selling to B2B marketing leaders. And so we wanted our podcast to rank for B2B marketing. And so one thing that we did, a very tactical thing that we did, the show was just named B2B Growth. We actually changed our show name to B2B Growth : your daily B2B marketing podcast. And what's crazy about that now, we actually rank in podcast players. If you search B2B marketing in Apple Podcasts, we pop up, I think it's the 4th search result natively in the app. But then whenever you put in B2B marketing podcast in Google, our show actually ranks first in that little carousel that Dan was just referring to. So B2B Growth pops up as the very first result for B2B marketing podcast. But back to Dan's earlier point in terms of like writing a blog post that actually satisfies that intent. If whatever it is your keyword is, we wrote an article about a year ago called 26 B2B marketing podcasts every marketer should listen to. So not only does our show pull up as the first thing in the carousel, we even beat out Marketing Profs, who has significantly more reach and influence than we do. But the first article under B2B marketing podcast is an article that we wrote, and we put ourselves on the list, I think at like number 3 or 7 or something like that. So that's how we executed, what Dan's advice was earlier, just to give you guys a tangible example. One question that we got that was similar to this, and I'm curious if any of you really have any thoughts on this. Dan, I think you saw the question come in, but it was from Ken. Do timestamps in show notes really make a difference? He says the context, is it worth the effort of doing them? Many podcast players don't even surface the extended details where the timestamps usually live. And then he sent me a couple links of, here's what it looks like with no timestamps. Here's what the page looks like with timestamps. I know that I personally never look at timestamps on a podcast. So even if they did show in the show notes in Apple Podcasts, I would not necessarily go that, but that's my own personal user behavior. Dan, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think right now it's not worth it. There are a few podcast hosts that have these things called audio chapters where you can dynamically link to certain segments of a podcast. I can't remember which ones do this, but one of the more popular, Buzzsprout, I think, does this. I think there's a few others that Casted does this. But most hosts will be getting that feature soon because it's becoming more popular. But it's only in the embed on your actual website. And that's where it kind of becomes nice if you are jumping from LinkedIn to a embed player and then just kind of want to jump to the section because of the audio chapter. I know I do it on YouTube every once in a while, but even then it's kind of rare, where this has been known technology on YouTube for a long time and very few people still take advantage of it. It's kind of like an extra credit thing. It's not even the icing on the cake. It's like a few sprinkles.
Yeah.
If you have extra time.
I'd be curious just in the chat, if you do use the timestamps whenever you're personally consuming podcasts, put that in the chat, because I'd just be curious. I might be the exception.
Yeah, I know I'm consuming podcasts passively, right? So you're not even looking at your phone. You're doing whatever it is you're doing. You're on a run, you're in the car, you're folding laundry. At least those are the 3 places I consume it the most. And I'm not looking at my phone to even look at that kind of information.
Awesome. All right. This one, I think Rob Roseman, who is here, might actually have an answer for this, but this question came from Peter Murphy Lewis. He said, have you seen any nuanced ways to turn some structured podcasts into a book, similar to what Tim Ferriss did with Tribe of Mentors? He's curious about what all goes into that. I know we have not done that yet, but Rob, you did that with your show, right? Dad, the Best I Can?
Yeah. Hey, James. I got inspired to do it because a copywriting mentor of mine, Nev Medora at copywritingcourse.com, he really advocates for repurposing the content. And he got me turning them into blog posts. And what I learned, he also was taking blog posts which were essentially Google Docs, and turning those into books on Amazon, which could be paperback or Kindle. And incredibly simple process. I was just transcribing my podcast, getting it formatted by somebody I found on Fiverr who knew how to prep it for Amazon. And, I've got a paperback book now that I can have forever. So it's the coolest thing ever James got a copy. The fact that it was paperback still blows my mind. And literally 90% of that book is a podcast interview transcriptions that I did some editing on, but the content was just written for me. So I kind of used like the Tim Ferriss Tribe of Mentors model, trying to take like highlights of the best interviews, which you could use for subjects or whatever you want. But just another one of the incredible benefits of podcasts is that it can write a book for you.
Yeah. You also put the rapid fire answers in here too. It looks like you've got quotes. It's really, really, really cool. I bought the book probably, 8 or 9 months ago. And so this is a brilliant execution. So whoever, Peter, if you're watching this on YouTube later, just search Dad the Best I Can. Obviously, you've already seen it in action from Tribe of Mentors with Tim Ferriss. But if you want to see another example, definitely go buy Dad the Best I Can, and you can see how Rob did it. Thanks for sharing that, Rob. Anybody else have any thoughts, or have you executed this in a similar or different way?
Hi, Dan Sanchez here with a quick break from this episode's sponsor, Vidyard. If you haven't started using personal video yet to enhance your marketing campaigns, you're missing out. Having the ability to quickly capture video and record my computer screen or both helps me not only create marketing assets faster, it makes them way more personable. I use personal videos in social media, email blasts, landing pages, and even on our website. Vidyard makes it easy to record, host, embed, and share videos to more deeply engage with your ideal buyers. Prospects have told me repeatedly that they are blown away every time they get one from me. So sign up for Vidyard free today by going to vidyard.com/B2B growth. And just like you guys, the team at Vidyard can't keep up with all these promo codes on podcasts. So they are making signing up as easy as possible. So no promo code needed. Just go to vidyard.com/B2B growth. So start using Vidyard completely free. And as a bonus, get their 2021 B2B Video Trends Guide. I'm doing a light version of this next month. I'm writing a book on thought leadership. And I'm doing a huge deep dive. I'm going to be interviewing like 20 to 30 experts on thought leadership this month, but released in the month of June. I won't be taking their answers and then putting them into a book, but I will be taking a lot of snippets from what they say and then giving them credit in the book to supplement what I've already outlined and what I'm already writing on. So in that way, I'm taking podcast content and then putting it in the book. And I might also do the reverse, take an actual written book and then turn it into a podcast that will be like a one-off podcast. As like a free audiobook people can go listen to.
Awesome. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was actually not a book, but I was actually going to do kind of like a case study. So each of the episodes could be like a different chapter in the case study. I guess a book is a great idea. If you turn it into a book or even an ebook and then convert it into a book, it's a great idea. And another thing I've done the process of doing is doing a course from some of the chapters. As an example, you can link the podcast with the description and everything. So
Ken just joined us. Ken, we answered your question earlier, so I'll have to send you the YouTube link so you can see the question that we actually talked about timestamps for quite a bit. So welcome, and you could check that out later.
I appreciate it, guys. Sorry, there was a long client call there. So, but man, I missed it. All right, I'll see you on YouTube.
Also, sorry for making you fill out a form at the beginning of this. Did not know that was going to happen. So I clearly have no idea what I'm doing with Zoom. All right. This next one is another one from Peter Murphy Lewis. He said, are there any B2B podcasters who map out their guest list based upon their content strategy, more specifically making sure they talk about keywords that they want to rank for? So when they first transcribe it, they're included in the blog. But secondly, write up a long form blog there to make sure the podcast content is being used there as well. If so, who does this? Any tips, templates, ideas? I know, Dan, this is something we talked about in conjunction with Google Alphabet Soup. So if there's a core keyword, call it sales enablement, that you're going after, putting in sales enablement space, the letter A, and seeing what pops up. So like sales enablement and analytics, sales enablement, assessment, sales enablement, answers, and going through the alphabet B, C, D, and then using Google Alphabet Soup as a way to develop, like, okay, we know people are searching Google for these specific topics related to the core topic that we want our show to be about. Now, let me go and find a guest that can talk about sales enablement analytics so we can actually rank for that. I don't think we've actually started doing that though yet, right, Dan?
I'm doing it for the first time again with this deep dive. I'm doing a lot of things with this deep dive. It's my second deep dive in, and I have a lot I've been improving. In fact, I can share, maybe this is for a blog post someday, but I've come up with a more robust system of doing deep dives. But part of it is topics to cover, which are all the different keywords, and then questions I've heard people talk about, things that I've wanted to know about thought leadership. But most of it is keywords, and I'm going to be presenting that to the guest lists before they come on to the interview, and letting them tell me like, oh, which one of these topics would you like to like unpack in our pre-interview, and then kind of pick around how I can flesh that out in the interview, and then just jump right into the interview.
Ollie, you had mentioned in the comments, you said Donald C. Kelly does this like a master. Are you referring to repurposing podcast content into a course?
No, sorry, I put that in a little bit delayed. That was the keyword thing. So he, for anybody that's been on his show, you basically have a predetermined number of titles and you get to pick from one. But for an example, my one was about LinkedIn voice notes. So that was one that I just felt I could add to. But the other ones were about writing great LinkedIn posts. Then it was about LinkedIn profiles. So he'd obviously decided that for the month of May or whatever, it's going to be LinkedIn. Next month it's about X keyword that's relative to whatever he's doing. So I'll be honest, that's probably the most organized I've ever seen in terms of extremely mapping out the keywords. Yeah. It kind of limited the title range a little bit, but it was easy to pick from because I knew what I could talk about, and it made it.
Did he do that in a pre-interview, Ollie, or did he was that like a Google form that he sent you prior to the episode? How did he get that from you?
That was, yeah, you got it right. It's a type form type of thing where you get the bio, upload your headshot, that kind of thing. Then his virtual assistant follows up and says, here are the topics in the next few weeks. Would you like to pick one or two and let me know your favorite? And we'll go from there.
Awesome. The one downside that I could see potentially to that would be if you're using your show for content-based networking and you're trying to get C-level, VP-level folks at your target accounts to be a guest on your show. I have found that whenever you add a lot of friction into the process of like figuring out what the topic's going to be, it's just more reasons for them to not say yes. And I haven't been through, I was on Donald Kelly's show a long time ago, probably long before he started doing this. That would be the only word of caution that I would add. I love that he's so intentional about like, hey, these are the keywords that we're going after. What can you speak to? That would be my only word of caution about implementing something like that, is like, is this going to add too much friction into the host guest dynamic? But I would imagine it would also work if you just worked it into your pre-interview. And so that's what we've started doing. Like when somebody says yes to be on the show, we're like, hey, awesome. Let's get you on a quick 15-minute call with the host just to make sure you're comfortable, nail down like the topic. And then you just work that into your pre-interview process would be my thoughts there. Any additional thoughts, Dan or Ollie? Or
I wouldn't mix them. If you're trying to go after keyword content, don't do it separately from what you would do with content-based networking.
Okay.
If you're doing it for keyword content, oftentimes the kind of people you're interviewing may not, like, they may feel confident that they can speak to that topic, but you're interviewing them and it's kind of becoming apparent that they don't know like the full answer that they need. Like, more about the topic and you wouldn't consider yourself an expert in that specific topic. That happens to me all the time. So I'm like, if I'm going to find someone to answer that topic, I'm going to go find people that I know that are going to be more likely to have the full answer that I know is going to do well on Google.
And that person is likely going to be very much a subject matter expert, probably another vendor, not necessarily somebody that could buy your product or service.
Yeah.
I wanted to go on it and talk about cold email, but that wasn't in their theme for the next few months. So I did LinkedIn because I'm perfectly comfortable and very fluent on that. He's definitely not getting a Gary Vee to talk about whatever's in their bucket. So in a way, like you said, I think you got to mix carefully, and maybe if they want to go for a Gary Vee, then have the pre-call and then say, hey, look, we're thinking about these topics. You don't have to read them out specifically like it's a menu, but then you can be a bit more prescriptive and sort of pick and choose, or maybe create one. Because if it's that type of person, you're not going to pigeonhole them. But for the average guy, or for churning out episodes, I thought it was a good system.
Yeah, I really like it a lot. I'm also a big fan of diversifying your content. So not just having decision makers at your target accounts be guests on your show, but also having, deep subject matter experts that spoke at a conference. And I think that the variance in that content, we're doing that in a lot of these deep dives. Dan's talking to book authors who are not really ideal buyers for us, but he's also talking to practitioners that are VPs of marketing at B2B SaaS companies that could potentially buy from us. And so I think it's serving the objective of the business, which is to build strategic relationships with the right people, but it's also making your content better, because it's serving your listener in two different ways. Listeners want to hear from practitioners, but then they also want to hear from subject matter experts. So that's a great point, Ollie. Thanks for sharing that.
What I've always started doing since the beginning is that, I only interview subject experts on marketing. So they could have their individual field, for example, field marketing or content marketing and whatsoever. What I did was, there's a site called Answer the Public. I'm sure you guys know of it. If it's like a field marketeer, for example, I would type in field marketing and Answer the Public. I'll get a different load of questions. I would use that appropriately according to the profile of the interviewer or the interviewee. And then I'll make the question so that it falls under that category, so that I have a keyword search in my title, and then the topic and the blog or the podcast itself talks about that entire topic.
That's a great point, Navnesh, where you've used Answer the Public in some other stuff that we've done, Dan, haven't you? I think you were the one that pointed me to that tool originally.
Yep. It's a good tool for ideation. I don't lean on it too heavily for telling me what people are searching on Google, but it does kind of like broaden out a topic and all the different points you could speak to. I think it's actually perfect for coming up with podcast ideas.
Awesome. We got a question from CJ, who I saw in here commenting earlier. It says, I'm curious how you make the pitch to prospects to have them join your content creation, and what commitments do you agree to before recording it? Dan, I'll let you take this one since you're doing a lot of guest outreach for this deep dive coming up.
I've been trying out a bunch of different things because we've had a formula for it at Sweetfish. And then I did an ABM deep dive and kind of learned some different just tactics and nuances. So I've been experimenting a lot with like email, LinkedIn, personalizing it, doing generic outreach. And so far I'm finding that the generic outreach does just as well as personalizing it, which I was surprised. So now I'm like, okay, I'll open up my 30 people I want to contact and just send them messages.
What does that generic outreach look like? You're keeping it like 2 or 3 sentences, right?
Yeah, like I can read you the script I'm sending now. It's something like, first name, I'm looking for thought leadership marketers to interview for a B2B growth show series I'm doing on the topic. I saw you interview on this podcast and thought you would be a good fit. The show gets 160K downloads a month. Interested? That's the current script.
Got it. So you are doing a little bit of personalization.
That one's personalized, but even if that's because I have a whole group of people I found on a different podcast that already interviewed. Easy to reach out to them because they've already been on a podcast somewhere else.
Yeah.
And on the exact topic that I want. So it's like all the people I wanted were all in one place. But I'm sending out a lot of messages that don't have that in there. I'm just like, hey, I'm looking for B2B marketing leaders to talk about how they're growing their companies. Looking for the latest tips and tricks. Interested?
Yeah.
Lots of people say yes.
I also don't think that we should overlook the fact that you're putting in there the show gets 160,000 downloads a month, because that's not the case for most shows. So what have your results been with that generic, non-personalized message when you don't mention the downloads?
I know from doing it for other podcasts, even a podcast that Sweetfish helped me launch that had I couldn't make that claim on, that I had a pretty easy time getting a hold of people. It just wasn't that hard. I think that's extra. That certainly helps you get a higher level person, because a few people ask you if you don't mention it. I know Leslie just did a whole deep dive and wasn't using that. So she asked the CMO of Gong to be on our podcast. And he was, because he gets on a lot of podcasts, he was like, look, how many downloads does it get? How many episodes have you done? And then she was able to go like, oh, we've done 2,000 episodes. You'll probably get 1,000 to 4,000 downloads. And so that's where it helps, is getting people that are frequently sought after by podcast hosts.
Yeah.
But for most people, you don't even need to mention it.
Yeah. CJ asked, can you fudge it? I think he's kidding. I said, our podcast will have 1 billion downloads eventually. I wouldn't say fudge it, but one thing that I've done in the past is talk about the social reach. So because we get really good reach on LinkedIn, hey, when we promote this episode, it'll likely get 5,000 to 15,000 views on LinkedIn. So something like that, CJ, I think could help, especially before the podcast has, a substantive number of downloads itself. So something to try there as well. All right. It's the top of the hour. We got to jump off here. We've already had a few people jump off, but thank you all so much for being here. We'll get this up on YouTube. If you just search Sweetfish Media, it's in the playlist for B2B podcasting Q&A. So you can see those at any time. You can see last week's. Just subscribe there on YouTube. You can check that out at any time. That way I don't have to blow up your inboxes every time we get one up. But thank you all a ton, and we'll see you next week. For the longest time, I was asking people to leave a review of B2B Growth in Apple Podcasts. But I realized that was kind of stupid, because leaving a review is way harder than just leaving a simple rating. So I'm changing my tune a bit. Instead of asking you to leave a review, I'm just going to ask you to go to B2B Growth in Apple Podcasts, scroll down until you see the ratings and reviews section, and just tap the number of stars you want to give us. No review necessary. Super easy. And I promise it will help us out a ton. If you want a copy of my book, Content-Based Networking, just shoot me a text after you leave the rating, and I'll send one your way. Text me at 407-490-3328.
Has it been a while since you flipped that thermostat from heat to cool? Turn to the experts at Griffith Energy Services before you do for an $88 AC start and check to make sure your AC is in tip-top shape. Griffith specializes in Carrier, but services all brands. Visit GriffithEnergyServices.com today. Your local Carrier expert. That's GriffithEnergyServices.com. License number MDHVACR 01-2278.
Griffith Energy Services. Doggone dependable.
I'm Robert Conti, Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. I have an urgent message. Unfortunately, traffic fatalities have increased in DC, and I need your help to reverse this troubling trend. Did you know that using a seatbelt can drastically reduce the risk of death or serious injury to you or a loved one? Seatbelts save lives, and together we can accomplish a safer community. Let's make Vision Zero a reality in DC. Always wear your seatbelt. Click it or ticket.